Awesome. All right, well, let's get kicked off. I'm excited to be here with everybody. We have got it's kind of interesting. I wanted to do a fishbowl. If anyone's ever been to the in-person, which I know Piero has been to some of the in-person Indie Pies, we have done from time to time a fishbowl event, but we're going to try and do something similar tonight. Although it'll be hard for me to enforce the people in the seats aspect of it. I'll describe it to you later. But let's get kicked off. So welcome to the June version of Indie Pie for 2023. Most importantly, though, we have a great speaker coming up for next month that Laura just mentioned, which is Andy Knight. He's been a speaker for the last couple Python web conferences. So if you've caught those either on YouTube or in person for them, make sure you come in and stay tuned for Andy next month talking about full stack Python. Should be he's a great engaging speaker. I love having him as part of our community. So I appreciate him being with us. If you would love to be a great engaging speaker for our community, I would love to have you as well. If you want to speak at Indie Pie, make sure you go to this link, papercall.io/Indie Pie. I would love to focus on local indie speakers if possible, but if you're not in Indy, it's not a big deal. It's all still remote. So make sure you go and pitch your topic ideas at that address right there, and we'll have you speak. If you're not on the IndiePie Slack, make sure you are. So there's a bit.ly link right there at the bottom. It's pretty low traffic. I mean, and when people do chime in on the channels, I think we get a lot of good engagement. So if you want to hang out with the other fellow IndiePie Pythonistas, follow the general channel there on the IndiePie Slack. Love to have you. And also in that IndiePie Slack is our jobs channel. Actually, tonight we might even be able to go around the room. How many people are here tonight with us right now? That's a small crowd. Normally we go around the room, and if anybody is actually looking for a job or hiring, we give them an opportunity to say so. We may do that tonight. Is anybody in the room looking for a new career? Feel free to raise your hand on the Zoom or turn on your. Oh yeah, John. So I'll let John go first. But if anybody else is also thinking about it, don't be shy. Let the crowd know here tonight what you're looking for. So John, if you are looking for a new career, let us know what you're looking for.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I've been to one event before, so looking forward to checking out this group some more. But I completed a boot camp last year with a company called New Apprenticeship, and I'm doing an apprenticeship right now with Infosys, and I'm looking for
Awesome.
a job as a data analyst.
Thank you very much, John. If anybody's looking to hire a data analyst, definitely check out John. Anybody else in the room looking to career change, looking for a new job? Is anybody hiring? Who's hiring in the room?
We are looking for senior candidates all the time.
So, okay, Piero, give a quick intro to what you're looking for and who you are.
Yeah. So I'm Piero Madar, Director of Engineering at the engineeredinnovationgroup.com. And so we're a software agency, software as a service, and our stack is generally, I hate to say this, but yes, Node and React and JavaScript. And here I am in Python meeting. But that goes back way further back, of course. But yeah, we're looking for senior engineers who are full stack, front end, back end, in the Node.js arena.
Awesome. All right, anybody else hiring?
I'll have a job posted here in a couple of days for actually a security data analyst. So that might be up John's alley. I'm with Elevan's help. My name is Toby. All over there.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Tobias. If you also wouldn't mind, Piero and Tobias, posting those into the jobs channel on our Slack, we would love to make sure that you get connected with our community.
Sure.
Very cool. And then if you are on Twitter, although it seems like less and less folks are on Twitter these days, it's a weird dynamic out there. We are at IndiePie on Twitter, and if you are live tweeting tonight for the event, make sure you use the hashtag IndiePie. And I want to thank our sponsors. Make sure we give those people a good shout out. So our main sponsor is our organizing sponsor, which is IndiePie. My name is Calvin Hendryx-Parker. IndiePie is organized by 6 Feet Up. We are dedicated to making the world a better place by accelerating tech leaders' impact. And at 6 Feet Up, our engineers are specialized in app development, AI, and big data and cloud technology. And our impactful clients focus on climate action, clean energy, and initiatives that benefit humankind. So I want to thank them for sponsoring. And I've been there since 1999. I'm one of the co-founders, and I've been the CTO. And I love the fact we've been able to do this stuff with the community. Our other sponsors. So if you're hanging out tonight, we've got a couple door prizes. We've got two PyCharm professional licenses this evening, thanks to JetBrains. We also have, thanks to JFrog, a Adafruit Pi portal. So given the number of folks who are here tonight, probably a pretty good chance you'll win one of the fabulous door prizes this evening. I want to thank our awesome sponsors for making this possible. If you or your company would love to become a sponsor, make sure you check out the indiepie.org/become a sponsor link, or email Laura or myself, and we'll be happy to hook you up with all the great goodwill that comes along with being an IndiePie sponsor. All right, so without further ado, tonight is actually more of a roundtable. I would love for it to have been a fishbowl, but I think it's kind of difficult to do a fishbowl because normally with a fishbowl, we have a set number of seats up front and we kind of tap people in and out, and only if you're sitting in the seat can you talk. But I think given the smaller crowd this evening, we can probably run this just kind of as a roundtable about leveling up your dev game. I'm going to actually unshare my screen because it's not relevant anymore to the topic at hand. So this is, again, maybe we can start a little Ask Me Anything style, or we can kind of go full round table. It'll be interactive amongst everybody who's here tonight for IndiePie, but want to talk about leveling up your dev game when it comes to your developer environments, how developers get started, what tools are accessible to them, what levels of access they have. Can they even install their development tools on their laptops without needing the IT department involved? These are the kind of things that we wanted to discuss tonight. And again, it's a very open roundtable. If you have got burning questions where you're like, how does that work in the real world or the enterprise or for startups? I would love to hear everyone's feedback on this, or we can take the conversation in a different direction if everyone wants, but I figured this would be a good place to start. This is something that at 6 Feet Up we've been talking about a lot internally, is how to make sure that developers can start and be productive quickly. One of my goals as like CTO of 6 Feet Up has been that a developer could unbox a completely fresh Macintosh out of the box and in an hour be committing code. Does anyone think that's possible?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I have my doubts though. But for that particular type of experience, I've myself always had an eye to want to explore the the virtual environments that you can get from like GitHub, what is it, Code Spaces, and other vendors.
Amazon has Cloud9. There's a couple other like that too. Even JetBrains has been experimenting with that as well.
I would love to be able to push a button and then just have a a pre-configured system ready for them to log onto, and then they can personalize it however they want, but it's all like cloud-based,
right,
and consistently rolled out for everybody, so everybody gets a cloud machine on the dev team that has the exact same provisioning and dependencies and all of that.
That's kind of what we do. So
is it?
Yeah. So I remember when I joined the company at the moment, they sent me a really fancy Mac, and I don't do anything on it. It's all like SSH through to Ubuntu dev server, and then VS Code is just using the SSH thing, and everything's happening remotely on. Yeah. And that stuff can be set up before the person's onboarded. So, there's usually like a little bit of permissions set up and config, but people could be, in the dev environment within minutes of receiving their laptop, because the laptop's also pre-configured when it arrives.
Yeah, I'd just love to explore that some more. I mean, I've worked with VS Code, and I do the dev container thing to remote into a container, or on WSL on Windows, you can remote into that as well, or you could basically install that VS Code kernel element in any remote system to log into it and get a debugging view. So if you guys are doing like farms of virtual machines that you can connect into remotely like that, yeah, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I wish I was the right person to talk to about it, because I'm just an end consumer.
Yeah.
And it just kind of works. So I don't really ask like much about it. I just arrived and there's like a dev server out there with my name on it, and I can SSH into it, and then we run a Docker container within that to give a consistent environment, like a capsule, I think it's called, and then with that
remote environment, you log into it. Are you able to like right away run like the tests, for example? Like, is the code checked out to that environment and ready to go?
Sorry. Hey, bud, can you give me a minute? Everything, all of our dev stuff also runs in containers. So if you do like make tests in one of our repos, it'll build the Docker container and then do Docker run test in that container. So you're never really running in like bare anything. Everything is in a Docker container, and like it works, but then if you're used to just hitting like debug in your IDE and expecting that to work, that doesn't work, right? So you can run stuff and it'll work for the person. They'll be able to like run PyTest, but to run the debugger in VS Code and have it actually work is quite painful at that stage. Not running it locally, there's like several levels removed.
Yeah, that would be part of my like requirement for this to be a great experience, would be that I could use like the PyCharm or VS Code debugger like easily from those environments. I mean, so let me describe to you kind of like my user story, or my case, my user journey for this, what this would actually look like. Is like unbox fresh Mac. The user sets up their account. They could install PyCharm, for example, or VS Code, clone the repository. Maybe they run make compile and then make up, and they are able to now start editing live code on their system and see it changing in real time. And we've been using Docker to get to this point right now, or previously been Docker Compose. So if you've got Docker Compose running, it starts up your database, your Redis, your front end, like maybe you're running Express for doing a React, like front end, debugging and live editing. But the issue we've run into, what is the issue we run into? Well, the issue we run into is that with Docker Compose, for example, we're not typically targeting Compose as our target deployment environment for a sandbox or for production. So now the developers are there's kind of a wall between what the developers do and how it gets deployed into any of these environments. So they now, if there's an issue in production or sandbox or wherever it may be, this other than their local machine, they kind of are stuck. They don't know how to triage. It's difficult to get the logs. They don't understand, the infrastructure that's actually running the production version of this service. So we've been moving more toward Kubernetes as a local development environment. And so the issue there now is with Docker Compose, you get the benefit of mounting your code up into the containers, so that as you edit it, you can set breakpoints, and if you've got the PyDev extensions installed into that container, then like PyCharm just works like it should. You can set a breakpoint and that breakpoint just works and you get to like debug your code. We've been experimenting now with some new tools, which I think are changing that landscape a bit, which is tools like Scaffold or Tilt give you file watching capabilities on your local system that, hey, David, and synchronize those files up into the container in real time, actually faster, I found, than the bind mounting goes with Docker Compose. And now I get the live reload. So if as I'm coding on Django files or coding on React files, I actually gave a demo of this. So we should probably post the link to my lightning talk from PyCharm or from PyCon this year, where in 5 minutes, I went from nothing on the file system to running a local Kubernetes cluster and a Django templated project sitting there. And I made a change in real time, didn't touch anything else, and it live reloaded on the screen in the browser through a Kubernetes container. So that seems to be like the dream for me, is that a developer can see their changes quickly. The one thing I didn't demo, which is missing, which is going to be the PyCharm debugging or VS Code live debugging, but it's definitely possible with the same PyDev extensions that you install into that image that you're using for development. But I don't think this is the norm. I think if you looked across the enterprise landscape, there's probably a lot of people who are nowhere near this. And so what do we need to do to get folks to this level?
So I think I know what you're talking about. I was messing around with the Cloud Code plugin for GCP the other day.
Yeah. Actually, that is one area I was also playing with.
Okay, I was trying to get a node job going to debug that, and I just could not. I could not get that scaffold config to work, and I could not get a connection to the remote machine using it. So it was, I saw you trying to get like Kubernetes cluster under the covers there up and running, but it just couldn't do it.
Same. I tried to use the Cloud Code plugin for PyCharm and could not get connected to my Kubernetes cluster. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why this is hard. And maybe someone else can chime in who's done it and tell Piero and I why that didn't work or what we're doing wrong.
They make it look so easy in the starts.
Now, one of the things that we moved on from, Scaffold was something we had adopted like a few months ago. The issue with Scaffold is it doesn't have two-way sync. And so if we're doing things like, Django in general, one of the things I really like about using containers to insulate myself from whatever underlying system I'm running on is that I can compile my requirements for my Django project inside the container. So I've set up make commands, like a make file at the root of my project typically. And so I typically have like a compile target that will take, and I guess I should kind of back up a little bit. Another tool I'm a big fan of is pip tools. So pip tools has a compile command. And so I specify what my main project dependencies are, and pip tools will compile all the leaf dependencies that I'm not explicitly using, but are dependencies of my dependencies. Mm. And so you want to be able to lock those leaf dependencies in a way that you can have repeatable builds. And so my compile process involves running pip tools compile inside of the container, because the container may be a different OS or a different version of that OS than the OS that's actually running the host, like the host Docker like host itself. Mm-hmm. So especially this becomes important if you're doing things like pandas on Windows versus pandas on Mac versus pandas on Linux, is you may end up with 3 different sets of dependencies depending on whatever the base OS is for that container. So if you compiled them locally and then launched them into the container and pip installed them in a container, if you compiled them on Windows and try to launch them into a Linux container, you're going to end up with a failure.
Yeah. But you sacrifice build time by doing that, though, right?
Well, I don't think so. So that's where that's actually the road I was getting down to, which is if you start using a tool like Tilt, excuse me, Tilt offers two-way synchronization of the files. So if I change a base like requirements file on my local file system, maybe I'm adding in a new direct dependency for my project, when you make the change, it syncs it into the container. I will run the compile in the container, and Tilt will synchronize back the compiled output of that requirements lock file to my local file system.
Mhm.
And so the other place where this is probably more obvious as a benefit is like if you're doing Django migrations. For example, I add a new model, or I change some aspect of the model and I run make migrations. If I'm only doing container only development, I can't just run the make migrations locally because I don't have all the stuff set up locally. I have to run that in the container, and then the make migrations needs to be able to sync that migration file back to my local file system.
Mhm.
Now check it into source code. So that's what Tilt brings to the table, is that two-way sync.
Got it.
So I can now compile my dependencies in the container, but it gets written out to locally. I can now make migrations in the container and have that synced out locally and not interrupt my development workflow. Where those things were natural if you're using like Docker Compose locally, but slow. I think the thing that's kept people away from using Docker Compose locally, at least on a Mac, has been the Docker Compose. Well, the Docker bind mount speed, the I/O speed has been terrible.
Do you one of the things that we were doing for our GitHub Docker builds was making sure that they were mounting what's it called, NVMe drives.
Speed, like for fast access. Yeah.
So I mean, it's significantly faster to the point where we were thinking about pulling an image or rebuilding an image, and we found that, and I don't remember the exact parameters of this, but we found that like rebuilding it from a NVMe drive was faster, or rather reconstituting it than pulling it over the wire. I'll try and find some more info about that.
Was that using the code spaces?
I'm very much the consumer of all of this stuff. So as soon as you ask any questions which require any like deep knowledge, I'm gonna come up short. But let me try and find out what the background was.
Does anybody else have like anything they would love to share about like their development environment, maybe optimizations they've got that make this faster, or pain points they wish they could alleviate in their development workflow?
So yeah, one thing that I thought about was originally when you posed the question, in 1 hour, can a dev be up to speed? And one thing I thought about was part of what makes me effective as a developer is like not day one productivity, but yes, day one is important, but also having an environment where I'm the most productive. And so when I hear conversations about like code spaces, I haven't had a great experience dropping in with all my favorite key bindings and a workflow. So I do think that like for me, the boundary that I see currently is like if from the terminal on, like, so if I can issue a command that's going to go behind the scenes and issue file watching, spin up the front and back end servers, if you will, but like that for me, why wouldn't we want that automated, right? Like it should be one word ideally, and it should be reproducible. But from day one in the environment, depending on how locked down it is, it's more about, can I get my configuration onto that computer to where I'm in my editor productive. So I think the SSH answer is good if you come in with the assumption that okay, well, either you're using like Vim or you're going to use VS Code with the backend server. But is that really equitable for all your developers who might have a different experience? Or maybe that's something that, you know, that dev team requires. I don't know. I'm interested in not necessarily posing a solution, but when you talk about workflows, I'm like thinking about how I would integrate with this.
I think that's something I've always tried to discuss with you anytime I'm mentoring or teaching people how to get started with programming. Like their computer, your workstation is going to be your power tool. That is like your way you are productive, is however you can set up your own workstation. And I think a lot of these, like the code spaces or some of these other like remote environments, you like you said, you have trouble either getting your dot files over there or key bindings, or you have to set up the PyCharm or the VS Code like remote server, and it's not your environment. Like I've got all my power tools sitting here on my local Mac, you know, all my diff tools, all my like source code management things. Maybe I want to use Git Kraken, maybe I want to use, you know, PyCharm and have like that full power available to me. But then you're kind of like you know, your capabilities get like greatly reduced when you're on some remote generic system that has the bare minimum of tools installed. But it seems like there's a way to do both. But I've not had a lot of time to experiment with having my tools be local, but the code execute remote. And I think that's again where I think Kubernetes gives us some benefit, is that it's a control plane that you can launch things into and have a ports forwarded back for debugging, for previewing, for playing around, where this becomes even more important if you've got a large project. And say you've got a project where, you know, there's 25 different containers of like, I've got the authentication microservice and I've got the, you know, user microservice, the profile microservice, and all these various things have been really split up into, you know, maybe more fine-grained microservices. The overhead to run that on a local system becomes almost too onerous for even for a very powerful laptop.
Have you tried serverless frameworks like SST or things like that? I know the configuration of that's in like JavaScript, but you can run, you know, Python lambdas and things like that off of that. And they come with a web console that gives you immediate API execution, you know, DB migration access and all that sort of stuff. So
say the name of that framework again. I'm not familiar.
So SST, it's an open source framework for AWS in particular. I may support others, but it sits on top of CloudFormation and has some automation and some shims that allow you to deploy your lambdas, but it's local code execution. So basically, I don't know exactly what's happening, but whatever container really gets deployed into that function pulls from your local host. So code changes are immediate, and you can change your API and then invoke it locally. As a person who does cloud infrastructure and app development, we can do this on projects that are like greenfield. Obviously, we can't do this in you know, any of the applications that are, you know, container based or things like that. But it's been good to get like POCs up and going, and it is that simple. I mean, it's a package, you know, to package .json command, right? Like it's a npm run command to stand it up and everything. And
so is it kind of a follow-on to the SAM framework from Amazon, or is this
so this is not an AWS repo. So this is like this is somebody else's prescripted. I think it's open source, and the way that they make money is they have like a separate service that lets you see your app deployment from like an observability perspective and cut staging environments and things like that. But SST itself is just like, it's higher level constructs above AWS CDK.
Okay. Yeah. So with SST, how hard is it to drop breakpoints into the code and dive in and debug? I don't know if you have that experience.
Yeah, usually I'm local invoking and looking at logs. I haven't put an interactive debugger. It's not my typical workflow, but yeah, it is local execution of the code at the end of the day. So small changes in your code are immediately reflected without a compile cycle.
Oh, that's cool. I'll drop that into the IndiePy channel. Put that in general. Here we go. Yeah, I had never heard of SSC, so I'm glad you brought that up. That's interesting. And it does work for Node projects and for Python projects, or is it pretty Node specific?
So again, you're building the infrastructure with like CDK-like constructs. I haven't seen if you can do it in Python because CDK is Python compatible.
Right. But what about the app itself?
Yeah. So it is a Node app at the end of the day. But it is, when you're saying like an immediately being able to be productive, it is a clone, get your dependencies down, and configure your AWS credentials, and you should be able to deploy into your own staging environment, your serverless, and start invoking stuff. We've been able to get new developers up pretty quick in it.
Is there a version of it that runs completely standalone on your local machine too?
At the end of the day, it's CloudFormation, so I would guess no. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could, not out of the box, let's say that. I'm sure a smart engineer can figure out how to run containerized Dynamo, and containerized Lambdas.
Yeah, it's actually, has anyone here used local stack for simulating local AWS resources? Because that does bring up another interesting point, is if you are doing cloud native development and you're doing things that are AWS specific, you have to be able to simulate like Dynamo or SNS or those kinds of like AWS specific services locally if you want to do like full test suites and things like that. Oh, I'm curious here, David, what does your team do?
To tell you the truth, for me, it sounds weird to say I'm developing cloud and trying to do it locally.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer of the only real test of a cloud infrastructure is in the cloud. So you need to create the account for each developer, and each developer should do their testing in their account. And in most cases, in fact, I don't recall any case in which the developer had to, or the development account had some cost, because we don't do that kind of testing.
Yeah, like free tier works for most of that.
Yes, and that's it. And you get rid of this problem of setting up a local infrastructure and this mock for the testing that at the end is not a real test because you're not testing in the cloud.
Right.
But I see the point of trying to do it locally. In fact, I have done it in tutorials and things like that. But besides saying I'm in an airplane and I cannot connect to the cloud right now, I don't see a real value to say, yes, I prefer to go all this way instead of having a testing account or a development account, and that's it.
I still think there's a value in putting like a breakpoint into a Lambda and being able to debug that Lambda.
Yes, but there are tools that let you do that with remote Lambdas. Sounds weird, but you can do that.
So you can connect to like a debugger port on a Lambda that's running.
Let me look for it. I don't.
Yes, please do. Because I would love to like compile a list of like awesome tools and libraries that every developer should know about, especially the people who are on this call.
Let me look for it. Give me a minute.
I think the first time I learned about PDB and using a debugger, it changed my life. Like the fact that I could look at the whole stack of code and explore every variable and every state of every function call in that stack. Like it's like the whole world opened up and the what was it the my eyes were could see. the wool, was it the wool or lift off my eye? What's the expression? Like, something was lift off your eyes. Someone's gonna have to help me with idioms tonight. Apparently my brain is misfiring.
It's definitely like the wool over your eyes or something.
Yeah, the wool was lifted off my eyes, like for sure. And I feel like we've gone backwards on that. I feel like the development recommendations, like the kind of, you go watch people giving talks about, I don't know, intro to development or becoming a developer, and no one mentions like a debugger. It's like voodoo science, and it shouldn't be. And we've been working with Airflow recently. So the Airflow project, the Astronomer's kind of like the main company behind that. And the way they've configured their containers to develop for Airflow do not lend themselves well to remote debugging of using like PDB or a PyCharm debugger or a VS Code debugger. But like, it is so fast. I've even taught my son. I have a 15-year-old who's into Java. He's a big IntelliJ user. And anytime he comes to ask me a question about his code, I'm like, well, did you put a breakpoint? That was my first response. Did you put a breakpoint? And he's like, no. And so he puts the breakpoint, and within 30 seconds of him putting that breakpoint, he's like, oh, I see what's wrong. It's so quick. I mean, I wish I could. We have a poll, raise hands. Like, who here has used an interactive debugger?
That used to be my first question in the Kenzie days, when the students would come to the, hey, my code doesn't work. Standard answer was, have you run it in the debugger?
It's like a lost. Sometimes I feel like it's a lost art. Like, did you not run it through debugger?
Yeah.
But the problem is, it's not become easy. There's not catered development environments to make it easier to run the debugger, because we're all moving toward a containerized world. I think PyCharm is still trailing behind a little bit there. You have to do a little bit of extra work. You have to kind of have a little bit of extra like knowledge to know how to do that.
Yeah. You mess with a launch.json and you got this configuration syntax and everything, and people just kind of glaze over when they see that.
But it's three things, right? You have to know that it's possible. I don't think a lot of developers really understand the potential of the debugger. Then you've got to make it happen. The third thing, I started with three things, but I came up with two. It's like, you have to know it's out there. Like, I think
you know it's out there, know how to invoke it, and then know how to navigate it. It's probably the third thing, right? If I was just kind of reading the tea leaves of what you're going for there.
Yeah.
Because you could invoke it. I mean, I think for the first couple of years I even used a debugger, I was like, I knew how to use C, like to continue, or like, I like step S to step in, but I didn't know it could like go up the frame stack, like, even in the text PDB. And then I realized, oh, PDB is for chumps. Like, there's so many more better interactive debuggers out there, even from a command line. Like, if you have not used what's the one I've been, IPDB, or there's some interactive ones that are like, got kind of like a curses based UI. And that's what actually sold me on like finally moving over and using PyCharm more with more seriousness. Was PyCharm had gotten pretty fast, and the debugger is pretty dang amazing.
Did you ever do any? Did you ever play with Smalltalk?
No, I never did.
No,
oh, that's the dream.
So anyway, describe to me the Smalltalk process. Maybe we can, take this evangelism toward the Python community.
So for a long time, I worked at a place which was Smalltalk all the way down. So you have a Smalltalk image, which may be a little difficult for people to get their head around, but is the IDE, it's the runtime, it's the executable, it's the same thing. And it was Smalltalk all the way down. So there was an object database at the bottom. You didn't have that many external dependencies. And so what I mean by the executable and the IDE being the same thing is that it's all like the same image of memory. And so you could do things like somebody has some error on their screen. I can basically suspend their image, bring it over, run it, and I'm where they were. Maybe there's some database dependency or message queue that you can't reconnect to because that's dead, but you have their application as it was there, and the IDE is built into the application, so you can make changes on the fly. The thing that I think debuggers, they're good in Python or other languages, and some languages have hot reloading, but nothing has quite captured the ability that Smalltalk had to basically change something anywhere in the stack and have it kind of be reflected. So you can cut back the stack and replay from a particular point. You can just change things, and it's just seamless. And you have this ability to, the debugger isn't really like something you use when things have gone wrong. You kind of use it as you're writing your code. So you can send an object a message. You don't expect it to respond to it. It'll give you a debugger, and then there's depending on which IDE you're in, there's like a button in the debugger saying create the method, and then it'll create the method, and then you can so it's just a different way of thinking, and I miss it.
Yeah,
I miss it a lot. But
I feel like ChatGPT's brought some of that back, where you can be like, I want to make a method that does X, and like the Copilot kind of gives you some pre-made templated things that flesh out like what you're trying to do, but not a debugger where it's like, I want to make a method here for that and go.
Yeah, so the runtime for your application has to support like gracefully pausing, right? Like, okay, so this is broken. Is it because it's not here, or is it because it's errored? Are you interested in doing investigation, right? So a lot of languages aren't set up for that. There's a talk that was given at Strangely a couple of years ago called Stop Writing Dead Programs. And it's about a 2-hour talk. And he discusses how a lot of the development innovations that came out of like Xerox PARC, where Smalltalk was created, never really made it mainstream. And unfortunately, they have a lot of really cool tools. And one of them is that the OS and the environment and everything is source code that's inspectable, right? So like, I think one thing that maybe wasn't completely gotten across there is that like, there is no limit to which you can go, right? Like some of the stuff is pre-compiled, but I think like Squeak is the major Smalltalk that's kind of being currently maintained. And I know that they have they create a bytecode interpreter that allows a lot of the things that were pre-compiled to now be source code that you can view.
It reminds me of the One Laptop for Child. I don't know if you remember that project. The original One Laptop per child project laptop had like a source code button. So you could be in any application, like the calculator, the spreadsheet, the word processor, and press that button, and it would show you the source code behind like wherever you were at in that actual like user application. I never got to play with one. That's one I meant to try and acquire somewhere.
Okay, there are good news and bad news.
Uh-oh. Let's go with the good news first. I'm a good news person.
I copied the link to the, I didn't find a better one, but in this one they mention how with Tundra, you can set up breakpoints in remote Lambda.
All right, I put it over into the Slack channel as well.
And that is very interesting.
All right, hit me with the bad news. What's going on?
Tundra closed. not there anymore.
Oh no.
And I remember I heard about it, but
oh, I see the
it
bad.
doesn't exist anymore.
So is it a big never mind?
Exactly. Which tells something about all of this. It tells us that these remote breakpoints didn't catch up, because it was interesting. You need to set up like a shell on top of your Lambda, which was controlling the the running of your Lambda and has the 15 minutes timeout,
Yeah.
the debugging session needed to be within that 15-minute window. And obviously it didn't pan out, right? Not for them, not for us. So we could think that local debugging is what it's working.
Right. So this is SAM kind of gives you that, right? The SAM.
SAM can do it. The Visual Studio Code extension sets it up for you. Serverless framework does it also. So it looks like that's the future.
Here we go. I found docs.
Is your goal to when debugging Lambda is to be like to use it as like a production debugger or as like a development, something to help you develop? Like I guess I'm it's not clear to me why you couldn't just run that locally if it was the latter in a Docker container.
So I think you can with SAM. The idea behind SAM is if you've got Docker installed locally, I can pull a repository and I can use the SAM framework locally to debug a Lambda container. So I did post into the IndiePy Slack using SAM CLI for debugging and stepping through code. So it looks like it is possible.
And doesn't Lambda allow custom Docker images now anyway? So why can't
It
you
does.
just run? Why can't you just run your normal containerized dev flow locally and just deploy up the container as your Lambda?
And that, so that's how when we use Lambda, it's the same container. But so that's kind of where my question is coming from.
Yeah, and that's what we do now too. We've got a couple projects where we're using Lambda for like data ingest, and we deploy just a container. Like I don't want to deal with uploading a zip file or whatever to S3 and launching that into a Lambda.
Do you find the cold start time is worse?
I mean, it really does depend on the use case for it. They do have that keep alive, so you can like ping a Lambda periodically to keep it alive. Some of the frameworks, like serverless framework, I think supports, like a keep alive for the Lambdas. I'm more concerned with just, can you debug the container even? And so yes, generally you can. And like, that's why I brought up the Airflow example, is because they've almost made it difficult to layer in like the PyDev package, so you can get a remote debugger port and set like a remote breakpoint, like from VS Code or PyCharm.
Oh, can you elaborate on what they did to make it difficult?
The way they were layering their containers, they had like a base container, and then if you wanted to write your own custom code, you had, my gosh, this is now me pulling back into my memory archives from like 6 to 9 months ago. If you just Docker pulled like the Airflow container and started it up, you'd get a running Airflow. If you wanted to layer your own code into that container, you had to use a special version of that image that they had made called a base image. And you would then, from Airflow -base as build, pip install your own stuff into that container. But the pattern they had used, what was blocking it? What made it hard? My gosh, I don't remember off the top of my head. There was something about the way they had structured the Docker file that it made it very hard to bring in that debug image, or not image, but like layer of a pip install of PyDev. I'll have to go again. I'll search back through and maybe I'll post it into the IndiePy Slack and let you know. But they just weren't like in their process of building this like developer API and environment, remote debugging was never a main consideration, like as part of the user experience. And I think it's even more tricky with software like Python software that's doing async. That can get really tricky as well, because as you call things and it goes into the async like the event loop, getting a breakpoint to reach back out into your IDE while the rest of the code has continued on its way, causes oddities for sure. But if you're aware of it as a developer, you kind of have to know how to deal with it. Like async is a bit of a different mindset.
But speaking of mindset, I wonder if it's more of a culture thing as well. Like you need everybody in your organization developing things in the same way to achieve what you're talking about. Like I don't think it's something you're easily going to do top down unless you're micromanaging every single repo and every single thing that's being set up. Like you need to hire people who share those same values as you. And I think if you do a poll of a lot of developers, a lot of them are happy with just printing stuff. And I know it's not true, but
okay,
I know it shouldn't be true, but it is.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but why have they not discovered the magic of like an interactive debugger? Why is print the default go-to?
Well, when you learn to program, you learn how to do a print, but
yeah,
debugging is like advanced topics. So in part is that you go back to what you know instead of I have an issue and I have to learn how to use the debugger. Is easier for me. It's quicker just to throw a couple of prints. It would be the same with the logging frameworks, right? You have logging. Many people don't use logging. They start doing prints. Why? Because setting up the logger takes time, and you prefer to spend that time working on the feature and not the framework, which is a bad idea in the long run, right?
Right. I mean, I feel like, as a sophomore or a junior in college, I moved out on my own into an apartment, and I'd make top ramen because I needed to feed myself. But I don't make top ramen now to feed myself. Like I know what good food tastes like, and so I make good food.
You graduate to peanut butter.
There are some of us that
that's expensive
doesn't know
protein
how to
right
cook,
there.
right? There are some of us that never learn how to cook.
Maybe we need to come up with a better analogy. But you're probably also, David, excuse me, not eating ramen either every day.
Yeah, that's a given, right?
Yeah.
But I can tell you the tuna cans are great.
It's true. From time to time, I will make a good tuna salad still around here that I did learn how to make in high school because I was hungry and my parents were like, figure out how to feed yourself.
I didn't get that far. I mean, open the
tuna can. Just open the can and eat right out.
Eat and you throw the can and that's it. You don't need to wash anything.
That's next level. So it's because of human race, we're just lazy and we don't feel like going to the next step.
No, well, there is the situation where trying to cook is a bad idea, and you burn things up, and the end result is not that good. So you say, let's skip the embarrassment and the time, and just eat from the can, and that's it, right? And I would tell you, it's similar here. What happens if by trying to use the debugger, you are going to spend so much time and you're going to get into another hole, another set of issues trying to fix the original issue, right? Now
Yeah.
the debugger is not working as you wanted, and the logger is not logging what you expected. And you realize you spent the whole day trying to set up something to solve one issue, and you now have two issues, right?
You're all just convincing me that I should go back to developing in Smalltalk.
Well, it's about developer experience. Like, if I want my developers to be happy, I want them to be productive, and I want them to have a good experience. But I think at the same time, they have to want that too.
I think that's the key.
Yeah.
We, like in our project, we have logging. We put in, you know, Winston or Pinot or whatever, and the facade and all the patterns are there, and it works.
Yeah.
It works fine, but they still type console.log.
So
Again, that goes back maybe to the saying, you know, you ideally want to make easy what is proper, and what's hard should be what you don't want. Like dropping like, especially, you know, when you think about it from an educational standpoint, you teach people printing because all they need to know is variable assignment and printing, and they're going to get results. You know, when you're talking about logging, especially structured logging, well, where do these logs live? Oh, now they live on another server. What's a server? And you can quickly kind of get down a rabbit hole in such a way
that's a great example. Like, really, like especially as you brought up, like structured logging. Like, you're getting into a layer that a developer probably didn't even put their head toward, like, which is like the observability or metrics or instrumentation. They're like, no, I just solved the problem. I delivered a feature. I don't know how it integrates into, like, say, the big picture of things. So does it come down, does some of this come down to it's an education issue for the developers to really be aware of the big picture? No,
And
that's a really good example.
That's something, and it's a great point. And it has to be with, do I want to learn how to debug when I have debug? Or do I want to learn how to do it and set the logging before I have debug? So it's already set up by the time I have the issue, and I don't have to spend that time setting everything up.
It's an investment. It's an investment in your future. It's an investment in time you have to make, but it's also, and it's like exercise. Like, I can go run once and not get any benefit, but if I go run 5 times a week for a year, I'm going to gain a level of, like, you know, physical conditioning that I will notice and my body will be able to use.
And sounds weird, but on the long run, you're going to be more productive.
Yeah. For sure. But I don't think you have to sell that to upper management. I think they would get that concept right away. So we're really having to sell to the developer that it is worth doing.
Developers under a lot of pressure though, right?
Yeah.
Billable hours, you know.
In the first hour, you need to commit to the code base.
Right.
Well, what if CS education doesn't have you at a place where you understand a distributed system?
Oh, do you think it does?
Well, precisely. So who is the 1 hour environment for? If, hey, put in these arcane commands and congratulations, you did a thing we can celebrate. Sure, we can make that happen. We can use code spaces and you can push up to GitHub and we can sit down in a Zoom room and go through the PR. But like, if you hire somebody more experienced who maybe does understand that, I don't want the 1 hour environment. I want a nice DX and a great workflow. And maybe some of those tools do take some investment, but if I onboard, maybe I want a week to learn your debugging workflow, learn your, you know, your CI processes, learn your change management and things like, and if you'd stick me at, it would be in a way kind of insulting, you know, with 15 years of experience or whatever, to then say, hey, in an hour, I want you to go change the color of a button and see it in production. Like, I mean, it's maybe a useful exercise, maybe not, but So maybe the audience depends on, like, the dream depends on the audience.
Well, I think you're right. There's going to be a preference from the developer for the tools they want to use. There's going to be a preference from the team in the like infrastructure and tools they want to support on the whole project. This is one of the things we started using makefiles again. It's been quite a few years, but those makefiles allows us to like encapsulate the complexity of some of these tool run commands, because they may have a lot of like really arcane flags that you need to run that have been adopted by that team. And as a new person in the team, I wouldn't know them. I would never know to run them. I may never incorporate them into my IDE. But if they're in a makefile and someone says, well, did you run the make lint command, or did you make the run make compile command? Because that's the standard way to interoperate on this project, you've already got like a huge leg up. Like a lot of that tribal knowledge has now been baked into a 2-line or 2-word command on the command line that's documented in the README at the very base of the project. It's like, to get started, you run these 2 commands, and now you run the tests, make test, and the tests all pass. Now I can change the color of a button and run make test again and know if I broke something in some other unrelated part of the code. So I think you have to somehow codify that tribal knowledge to give people a leg up so they can have that, this is how this tribe runs this code base.
Speaking of make, have you tried Just? Somebody
I did try Just, and I was intrigued because it's like a simpler make, right? There's no dependency tracking associated to it. But in the end, I found we were actually using the dependency tracking to speed up the runs of the commands, like the targets. Like for example, so many things we do in either Python or JavaScript, depend on did the requirements file change? Do you need to rebuild an index file if the package JSON didn't change, or if some other requirement didn't change? So just the simple tracking of that's just on like modification times of files on the file system that it tracks is actually still, I think, valuable.
But doesn't that okay, maybe you're not using, so for us then a lot of that would get tracked by the Docker build. So
yeah, so some of it definitely Docker encapsulates some of the things we would have done in make. And so then that becomes another complexity that people have to know about, because if you don't order your Docker file in the correct order, you're doing more work than potentially you would need to, like rebuilding more of your image because of the layers than you would need to. So that's another area where you have to now apply new knowledge to Docker files to make sure that the thing runs and builds as fast as possible, or else you could be burning through CI minutes like crazy because you didn't properly construct your Docker file. But as a developer, they're like, I just want to write Python. So I get it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think there's a kind of like a tech leadership mindset of like, I'm going to put in place these really good practices to make it easy for new people, junior people, to join in and hopefully naturally do the right thing. Like it should be obvious what the right direction is. Actually, it gets back to the Zen of Python, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. Is like there should be one and only one obvious way to do something, but the corollary to that is like, unless you're Dutch, or it may not be obvious unless you're Dutch. Is the next line of the Zen of Python for that one. So battling the unless you're Dutch, it should be obvious unless you're Dutch part of it is the problem. But I feel like that Python community's done a relatively good job of that. In the standard library of Python, you can almost guess what something's going to be named from like a method, because there's a level of consistency there, and that helps. And if you're using like make files and there's a level of consistency with like the targets, and whoever kind of dreamed up the system and the tribal knowledge has embedded that into the make file and the Docker file correctly, I should still just be able to write Python to solve my first bug and to get productive and have a commit in an hour. But a lot of work has to go into making that possible.
I think the conclusion is we need to invest in time and effort at the start so we can reap the benefits later. It's easy to say, no, we don't invest anything. Everyone gets to a project and do their stuff, deals with it however they want. But in the long run, it's bad. If you set up this landing for the developer, you can make them very productive very quick. But you have to invest in that and invest in keeping it updated, which is the other problem. We normally get projects and they give you this document of how to set up everything, and it was done 3 years ago, and nothing works like that anymore, right?
Right. Yeah.
Does anybody do DX as a service business model?
Oh, that was a hot topic at KubeCon I was at in Detroit last fall. There's been another one since, but there's 101 companies out there right now trying to deliver DX as a service, I believe. I'm not buying it yet. We'll see. Because I think that upfront work that like David just mentioned pays off dividends in, a reduction in technical debt, the scaling up of the whole project as a whole, like being able to onboard new developers, but it costs money up front. And when you're like either a scrappy startup or you're a well-established enterprise with a limited budget for doing some XYZ, or you've got the stress of billable hours to do, it's not always the obvious choice when you're starting. But it needs to be, because you'll pay for it later.
Yeah. Mm.
That's what I say.
When are you going to publish your manifesto?
I think I'm just going to get on a microphone and rant constantly about it and turn it into social audio. Like that's what we're going to do. No, we're actually, so we are, I joke, but I am doing efforts in this direction as part of like 6 Feet Up. We are working on developer experience, developer best practices, enterprise software best practices, and trying to get them organizations to engage in better practices. And so if you go to, I'll give a little plug, 6feetup.com/best. Will take you to a page where it describes a lot of things we're actually trying to do around this to help other companies become better software development organizations. They may not have been software development organizations when they started, but they certainly are one now, and they may not know it yet. And they need to embrace that. And so I think a lot of times they don't know where the gaps are. And so this tool we've been working on for like the last 6 months has really been around helping to expose those gaps, because you can't change anything you don't measure. So if they don't know it's a problem, they can't make it better. And so we are doing something about it. So yes, I do have a manifesto. I'm working on it actively.